You ever hear yourself say or have someone say to you, "You're so cold, you never open up, you don't let people in"? And you smile politely, maybe fib, "Yeah, I guess I just like my space." But then at 2 a.m., when the world's quiet and you're scrolling through your phone again, and you catch yourself reading a message and deleting it because you worry what it might mean, you know something else is going on. Here's something striking. In a recent report, about 63.9% of U.S. adults say they experienced at least one adverse childhood experience. 1 in 6 report 4 or more. And with that background, what if your emotional distance today, what others call being cold, isn't about you not caring, but about you having protected yourself early? What if the root of your behavior isn't what you think, and it's hiding in your earliest years? It's not about what happened to you in the obvious sense. It's about what didn't happen. Imagine this. You're sitting in your living room on a Friday night. You've ordered something you love. You've got a buddy coming over. The text pops up. "Hey, thanks for being you. I feel like I can trust you and you feel something okay." Yet you reply, "Haha, thanks. Same here." And you change the subject. Maybe you ask about their work. Your face is relaxed. Everything seems fine. But inside, there's a small voice. Trust? Elementary school you at lunchtime. You tell your parent about a mean comment a classmate made. They respond, "Kids will be kids." You bury it. You say nothing more. Same patterns repeat. Teen you. Oh. When you try to talk about how lonely you feel, your sibling says, "Dude, cheer up." So you nod and walk away, fast forward. Now you're in your late 20s or early 30s. A friend says, "Why can't you let me in?" A partner says, "Why are you always pulling back when things get serious?" And you shrug and say, "I don't know." But you do know. You just haven't connected the dots yet. Today, we're going to walk through how those early silent moments, the invisible ones, shaped your adult patterns. We'll look at what research says. We'll use examples you'll recognize. And at the end, you won't just understand yourself better. You'll start to embrace yourself and take steps to change. Because you're not cold, you're careful. And that's okay. Let's define what we're talking about, because cold often gets thrown around loosely. It might mean you avoid emotional conversations with friends or partners. When someone says, "How are you, really?" you say, "I'm fine." You cherish your independence, but sometimes feel lonely and wonder why you can't just be vulnerable. You're the one who never texts back long, deep messages. You keep it light, safe. Here's an example from daily life. You're in a team meeting at work. Someone asks for feedback on a personal project. You smile, you say something polite, but inwardly you're thinking, "Why are they asking me? What if I say the wrong thing?" So you keep it neutral. You leave before others linger. Later you feel, "I'm friendly, but I'm not connected." What you're doing is safe. Distance has kept you going when you had to, but it also keeps meaningful connection away. And that's the tension. Why does this happen? Because in your early years, you learned, perhaps implicitly, that when you show too much, it might not be met. So the smarter, quieter move was to show less. Let's go back in time. We don't need to know exactly what your childhood looked like. We need to understand patterns. In the meta-analysis by Stoltenberg and colleagues, the global prevalence of childhood emotional neglect is around 18%. Emotional neglect means a child's emotional needs are not sufficiently met, not because the parent is necessarily cruel, often because they didn't recognize or respond. From Dr. Jonas Webb's book, Running on Empty, she defines it as the failure of parents to respond enough to a child's emotional needs. What happens? A child thinks, I don't speak up because no one listens. Or, I learned to manage on my own because support doesn't come. And that becomes a survival strategy. As a kid, you come home from school. You're upset. You got picked last for a game. You tell your parent. They say, that's part of life. You nod, repress. Years later, in your 20s, you face rejection at work. You think, no one cares how I feel anyway, so you dismiss it alone. You close off. Research supports long-term effects. A study found that children with high exposure to emotional neglect had significantly higher depressive symptoms by age 18. Another found that emotional abuse neglect might have more harmful long-term effects than physical or sexual abuse. So your coldness isn't a trait, it's a learned protection. Now let's connect the past to present. Protection mechanism. When you learn early that your emotions aren't met, your brain says, I'll handle this myself. I won't get hurt again. So you develop habits like emotional suppression. You don't show sadness or fear. Detachment. You stay safe by staying distant. Hyper-independence. You think I shouldn't need anyone. Guarded trust. When someone says, I'll be there, you think, I'll believe it when I see it. You're in a committed relationship. Your partner says, let's talk about our future. Your mind flashes. Here it comes. Vulnerability. You answer, sure. We'll see. Then later you pull away because discussion of future feels too risky. Another example. A friend invites you to share a problem. You listen, you nod, but you don't share your own. Later you think, why did I hold back? Because it felt unsafe. Because you learned that revealing means expecting help that didn't come. Psychology research, attachment theory, neglect studies shows that people who grew up with neglectful emotional environments often interpret closeness as risk. Cambridge research found that adults with early emotional neglect often perceive safe relationships as threats. Changes in stress response systems, brain plasticity, regulation of emotion are all impacted. In other words, when someone steps in emotionally, part of you asks, what's wrong? Why now? So you retreat. Protection wins over connection. Let's pause and give you some specific signs. You might recognize them in yourself, and that's okay. You rarely initiate emotional conversations. If someone says, how are you really? You deflect. You keep your close circle very small. You trust few. You let fewer in. You're excellent at self-reliance. You don't need anyone, which on the surface looks like strength, but the cost is isolation. You fear dependency. If I let them in, I'll be disappointed. You avoid showing vulnerability because you're not sure how it will land. You may feel empty even when life looks full because the closeness you want doesn't show up in the way you expect. You move to a new city, you make friends, you join groups, but you never share your real stuff. After 6 months, you still feel something's missing because the emotional layers never built. At work, you're respected, you're competent, but you're always the professional. You keep personal stuff away, and at home, you unwind alone with a show. You don't call your parents, you don't reach out, because the default is, I handle it. All of that is normal, given your history. And now you're beginning to see the puzzle pieces. This is important. When you recognize the pattern, don't beat yourself up because you weren't born distant. You became distant because you had to. Think of a young sapling in a storm. Over and over, the wind bends it. It leans in one direction to survive. Later, the wind stops, but the tree stays bent. That's what happened to you emotionally. So next time someone says you're cold, you might think, actually, I learned to bend so I wouldn't break. You protected younger you. Reframe the narrative from I'm flawed to I adapted to survive. That shift opens space for compassion. And research says when people understand their early patterns, they gain self-compassion and healing accelerates. For example, the positive psychology site states that childhood emotional neglect correlates with poorer interpersonal functioning, but recognizing it is the first step toward change. Okay, now the good part, because understanding is only half the journey. The other half is action. These are not overnight fixes. They're invitations to gradual change. Step 1. Name it and narrate it. When you feel yourself pulling back, pause and think, what am I feeling right now? Say it out loud. I feel unsafe. Or I feel like I might get hurt. When you name the emotion, you weaken its unconscious power. Step 2. Small risk, safe environment. Pick a person you trust, even a little. Say something small but vulnerable. Example, I've been feeling a bit left out lately. Observe how they respond. Often, you'll find the world isn't collapsing. You're learning to open the door. Step 3, create rituals of connection. Maybe it's a weekly check-in with a friend. How do you feel about this week? You lead. Or journaling. Write a letter to younger you that says you did your best. These rituals build new wiring. Step 4, seek help when you're stuck. Therapy, peer groups, coaching, whatever fits. Because some wounds are deep and we need external help to bear them. The research on emotional neglect underlines that long-term effects can be strong. Step 5, celebrate the shifts. When you do open up and share and someone responds kindly, pause and acknowledge it. I took a risk and it wasn't a disaster. Rewiring takes time, but every small step counts. You decide to invite a friend over and say, I've had kind of a rough week. The friend listens. You feel seen. Afterwards, you feel lighter. That's new. That's growth. I want you to pause just for a moment. In the comments below, have you ever pushed someone away even though you secretly wanted them closer? Or held back because you felt, I'll take care of this myself? Type me too or share your story. Just a line. No pressure. Here's what I hope you leave with. You're not broken. You're not cold. You're not unreachable. You're protective. You learned survival early, and now you have the chance to choose connection on your terms, with awareness, with compassion, and with steps. The goal isn't to erase the walls you built. It's to build doors in them, doors you open when you feel safe. And yes, maybe close when you don't. That's healthy. That's wise. The journey ahead, it's not about suddenly becoming emotional and oversharing and hurting. It's about selectively risking with someone you trust. It's about saying, I deserve someone who stays when I open up, and staying for yourself when you do. If this video helped you see yourself a little differently, stick around, subscribe, not because you must, but because you deserve a space that gently reminds you you're safe enough to grow, because you are. You were never cold. You were just never warmed the way you needed to be. And now, you're gradually learning how to feel the warmth and maybe to let others in. Thank you for being here. Until next time, take care of that younger version of you. They're still cheering you on.